Yesterday's price is not today's price.
We are back. Welcome to another episode of Dynasty Market Watch 1.06. I'm one of your hosts, Todd Halverson. I'm joined, as always, by Brian O'Leary and Matt Davis. This week, we're also joined by someone that is widely known as one of the best Dynasty players in the space, best known as Dynasty Zoltan on Twitter. Mike Garay is here. Mike, Brian is our current leader of number of leagues with over 50. I saw a tweet earlier today from you that might indicate you have even more. So what are we looking at here?
Yeah, I'm sorry to upstage you first thing on the pod, but I'm up at, I think it's 93 Dynasty leagues and a few redrafts sprinkled in there. Yeah, only a few best ball too. I really got to get into the best ball because Sunday mornings lineup setting is an absolute disaster for me.
So, I mean, I have a heart attack just about every week setting all my lineups, especially when there's late rule outs, all that stuff. But I appreciate you being here. I'm feeling a little less insecure. So that is a huge plus for you to be here, obviously.
Yeah, just don't join 20 startups every year, or this is what's going to happen to you.
All right. So, Mike, this week we're talking rookie market value and anybody that we're buying or selling. I know Mike's had a couple rookies from this offseason that just in the last couple of weeks are really starting to explode. We're going to be talking contender pieces, cost to acquire for some of those guys. And then, of course, we're going to be reviewing some of our trades. But we always started off with bull or bear. And right now I've been workshopping the idea of calling it yesterday's price. So, Mike, kick us off with the bull or bear or yesterday's price, if you will.
Yeah, so guy that I'm buying heavily is a guy who I honestly regret not buying heavily earlier, and that is Brandon Ayuk. He has been obviously incredible this season, probably the best receiver in the NFL, or at least top 3 this season, number 2 in PFF grade, number 2 in yards per route run. He's running a lot deeper routes this year. His ADOT is up almost 3 yards compared to last year. And I've just loved what I've had to see from him. Clearly the number one weapon. Kittle looks a step slow. Debo is taking the backseat there. I think Ayuk probably gets extended there. And he's a guy who's moved into my top 10 of my wide receivers pretty comfortably. He's still priced quite a bit below that I'm seeing. He's priced closer to 1 first and 2 firsts I'm seeing in a lot of markets. So that's a player I'm aggressively buying.
Yeah, I think just last week I tweeted, Mike, that I've got Ayuk firmly in the top 12. And now I'm not even, that's not even really a hot take anymore. If we look at like Fantasy Calc or Keep Trade Cut, one of those, he's probably in the mid-teens still. But I mean, wide receiver 12 for me, anything in the high single digits, I feel like is really fair. I mean, he's wide receiver 16 this year in points per game, and he's ahead of guys. Matt, your guy Lamb, he's ahead of guys like Garrett Wilson, also Olave, Waddle, Devontae.
No, he's just been absolutely incredible. Like, you kind of have to, other than sticking to whatever your bias was coming into the season, you have to look for reasons to not have Ayuk be in your top 5. Because if you look at a player who's performing at this level, obviously in points per game, he's not quite up into the top 5 yet, but he's certainly getting there, and he's had some bad touchdown luck. And you just look how he's playing, like over the middle of the field. Brock Purdy is looking to him every single time, and he is open all the time. In the last 2 seasons, his yards per target in short and intermediate over the middle is almost 11 yards per target, which is absolutely absurd, by far first in the NFL. And he's caught, what is this? 64 out of 81 targets thrown to him over the middle of the field over the last 2 years. He's just absolutely feasting. And I think you look at a guy like CeeDee Lamb, you're running out of reasons to put a guy like CeeDee Lamb over a guy like Ayuk, certainly running out of reasons to have them more than, let's say, a second round pick apart. I know we're going to get into some trades in a little bit, but I think he's right in that tier, like you said, after the top 3 or 4, where it's all pretty bunched up. And every few weeks, it seems like the wide receivers are kind of just swapping around there.
Yeah, Mike, I'm totally on board with this Ayuk love. We're definitely a Ayuk podcast. We just did a recent startup, not to get too deep into that, but I took him 302 and couldn't have been happier about it. And I think that's where he's going to be, if not higher, when we're doing our next startup in the off season.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I was at the 206. I ended up getting CeeDee Lamb as the wide receiver 9 off the board at the 206 there. That was just a value thing for me. I think it's safer, but I think him and Ayuk are right in the same tier.
Sure.
Yeah, and I was mixed in right in between you guys. I was at the 210 in that draft, and I ended up going with Kyle Pitts just because I can't pass up Kyle Pitts in that range. Like,
so we don't have to change our name to Brandon Ayuk lovers. Matt, why don't you hit us with your bull or bear this week?
Yeah, mine, guy I'm getting more bullish on is Javonte Williams. I've been a big fan of his since he came into the league with the ACL tear, and I believe it was like an ACL and MCL tear where it was multiple ligaments. Those type of injuries always kill my love for a player, no matter how good they are, especially running back. So I moved off any shares I had of him last year, and this year in the preseason, I would say like around July, August is when I started getting interested in buying back in. And I think we're reaching that point where if you want to buy back in, you still can, and you've got to do it now, like in the next couple of weeks. Because I think eye test wise, I think Javonte has looked a lot better than his production has showed. The last 2 weeks, I think he has single-digit fantasy points, but we saw him in the Thursday night game against Kansas City, so that was an island game where we got to watch him. Then he unfortunately faced my Packers, and the Broncos beat the Packers, and he wasn't getting a lot of work, 10, 15 touches, but I see some decisiveness and bursts there that I think by the end of the season, he's going to be back in that conversation.
Well, I know that there's no better to talk about Javonte Williams than Mike, because Mike has been on the Javonte train for quite some time. So, Mike, as we get into Javonte, I'm going to give you kind of a couple guys here of would you rather. I recently offered out Javonte for Tyjae Spears, and I got a quick reject on it from somebody. So I don't know where you stand on Tyjae Spears, but what do you think about that one?
I am high on Tyjae Spears. He's definitely been a buy for me, but I'm taking Javonte over him quite comfortably. I think, Matt, what you said is spot on. So Javonte got hurt in week 4 of last year. So fast forward 12 months, which is what the typical recovery time is that Javonte obviously beat. If you want to look at Javonte's first 4 weeks of the season this year, he was averaging just over 2 yards after contact per carry, and he only had 5 missed tackles forced. That's in the first 4 weeks. In the last 2 weeks, he's forced 9 missed tackles, and he has over 4.5 yards after contact attempts per carry, basically doubling those statistics, which are some of my favorites, especially those are the metrics that Javonte was dominating in as a rookie and a sophomore those first few games. So I'm all in. I think he's back. He looks more like himself. McLaughlin coming up. I don't even think that's that bad for him, because I think McLaughlin's less of a threat to the goal line role than Pirine was. And I think that Pirine is just going to get moved essentially to the bench. So I'm still taking Javonte there, regardless if I'm a contender or not, because if I'm contending, I think Javonte is going to give me a whole lot more the rest of the season, especially.
Yep, agreed.
Todd, what are your thoughts? I'm a big Javonte guy myself, so I'll spare you guys any more Javonte love. But Todd,
Javonte's a weird one for me, because I feel like he's very difficult to have on a contender team, because you're putting a decent amount of value into a guy that's not producing a lot. I'm not going to hold a running back that's valued as high as him on a rebuild team. So I find myself in a difficult spot with him. I would prefer to be moving from a Javonte into more of a contender piece like a Kamara, for example. But as far as like Javonte, the player, I do think that he is going to turn things around and become the guy that a lot of people expected. He's the type of guy that maybe like week 12 or 13 on a rebuild where I've already done all my possible points work. I pretty much know what pick I'm going to get. I wouldn't mind trying to buy into him late in the season and kind of get that running back early, get my running back, fill out maybe a position that I don't want to fill out right now or later. So Javonte is kind of a weird one for me. I don't see myself wanting to hold him on a lot of contender teams right now.
So question there, Todd. Like my actually concern with him from a dynasty perspective is Broncos have looked at a lot of running backs in the last few years, and it's possible that McLaughlin coming up on a rookie contract means that they won't, but they were in the Dalvin Cook conversation. They were in the Jonathan Taylor conversation. They've been poking around the various drafted running backs. If Jahmyr Gibbs fell, there was rumors there. So I'm a little bit worried about buying basically any running back being valued as a starter in, let's say, December or January for the next season, just because it seems like there's more downside than upside there.
Yeah, it would almost be a zig. I mean, you're almost going and saying somebody's willing to just, I want a second. I just want picks. I just want to just load up on picks at the end of the season. I already know what pick I'm going to get. I'm fine taking on some points for the last couple of weeks. And if you're willing to just send me Javonte for a second and a third or something, all right, then I'm game. And I think we all agree that he is talented. I don't know that we'll see the jump into like the top 6 or 8 guy because of the workload. But if it does happen, then great. But even if it doesn't, I'm still probably getting a very workable running back in that RB20 range. Another thing as a rebuild converting to a contender, you need a couple darts like him that could maybe convert into that top 12 range. So you're hoping that maybe you can get one and it becomes a DeAndre Swift of this year or a Pollard, something like that turns the table for you.
So I think one of the key points there is, to me anyway, I think this is, if you want to buy, this is the window to buy right now in the next week or two, because like you said, Todd, you don't like holding running backs that aren't producing, and Javonte has a bunch of 5 to 10 point games this year. And his value, like you said, it's still pretty valuable. It's still close to a first round value right now. People love this guy. They love the prospect. They love what he showed on film as a rookie. I think everybody's dying to move him back up into that like low end RB1, like 10 to 12 range.
Simply said, he's still a name brand, right, Matt? Yeah. It's just that's it is what it is. Those types of guys carry cachet longer than maybe they even should, and if they're showing the right prospects for growth, then it's even better.
So I really think it's 1 or 2 20 to 30 point games, and then you're paying a first and second for him. So I don't think it will take much. I think 1 or 2 games and the demand will increase a lot.
All right.
So Brian, in the essence of time, I'm going to save my bull for my buy of the week. It'll be the same thing. So Brian, you close it out.
Yeah.
I'll do my buy for the buy of the week. And it's going to be a little bit ironic. But I'll save that.
Love that. Yeah. Love that. Yeah. So my bear of the week. So this is our first bear is Rashee Rice. So this is not an indictment against Rashee Rice as a player. I think he's just getting the Chiefs treatment. We're talking about name brand with Javonte. He's getting the Chiefs name brand wide receiver 1, where everyone knows it's Kelsey. But I don't think he's playing a ton of – like he's playing like 50, 60% of snaps right now. Sure, that will probably go up, but maybe it isn't. Maybe there's some concerns that, football guys better than myself can explain better than I can. But – so it's more of a it's going against the hype, and I'm also getting a little frustrated with people kind of victory lapping him a little bit. So Mike, what do you think about Rashee Rice here so far?
I've been very impressed, and we've seen a boost of some sort in terms of his route rate. Last week it was at 65%, his highest of the season. I don't think he's that great. He's a player that I would love to use to either get an early second in this upcoming draft, a pick that we know has a lot of value that isn't going to decrease, or use him to upgrade to a real superstar wideout. So if I have a Michael Pittman and I can add a guy like Rashee Rice to get, Brandon Ayuk, like we were talking about earlier, basically have him as a placeholder for that late first, early second value, because people are really excited about him. But I think a lot of his 28% targets per route run, it's great. He is the trust of Mahomes, but I think that says a lot more about the Chiefs' other weapons and how terrible they've been. I think the Chiefs will almost certainly be in the market for 1 or 2 wideouts this offseason, especially with Kelsey's age. I don't see Rashee Rice ever being a game-changing fantasy asset.
Thank you.
And
so talking some Matt, let me ask you a question here, Matt. You're the known biggest Rashee Rice fan here of the 4 of us, I think. So I just traded Rashee Rice in this past week. him plus a 25-3 that I'm expecting to be late for an early 24-2 and a later 25-2. So Rashee Rice plus 25-3 for a 24-2 early and a later 25-2.
Yeah, I think that's about his value right now. I think it's fine to sell off for that. You're essentially doubling your profits from the offseason, maybe a little bit more. I mean, Rashee Rice was a late second in most rookie drafts, I believe. So I'm fine selling for an early 2 and 2-3 swap like you did. I basically agree with what Mike was saying. I have liked Rashee Rice. I've been high on him over the past month, only in the sense that I could kind of see this like value increase coming, and I don't know how much higher it gets. I think he's going to continue doing that, like this 10 to 15 points and making people like happy that he's showing some production, but I don't see it ever being difference making production this year.
So we've talked about this with other receivers on previous episodes, like Zay Flowers, for example. I think he's looked great, but if he's being treated like a top 5, top 10 wide receiver in Dynasty, like, doesn't matter how much you like a guy, if he's going well above what he can potentially be worth, or he's at his ceiling right now and you can get more, that's what you have to cut ties. It's not personal, just business.
So I'm going to give him 2 feathers in his cap right now. One, and then I'm going to tear him down. So for the first being, he is PFF wide receiver receiving grade 16th overall. So that's good. I think part of that is due to the fact that he's seeing a lot of zone when he goes into the game on specific pass plays, and he's elite against zone. He's not good against man. The second being the wide receiver, the ESPN analytics for wide receivers just came out today. And on that one, he is 25th overall for the season. So 2 really solid data points for Rashee Rice. With that said, I'm with Mike, and I think we've kind of all said it here. I think the move is to combine him with somebody else on your team and jump into that elite tier of wide receiver. I think that's the easiest way to go about it. I don't think you're going to be able to buy him for a couple seconds. I think if you want to get him off the person that has if you want to get Rashee Rice off the person that has him, it is going to take maybe a first rounder at this point. That's how high those people are that have him.
Or you have to offer production. I mean, a lot of owners that have Rashee Rice right now probably aren't competing. If you can go get a Keenan Allen or a Jacoby Myers plus a late second, something like that, where you can improve your current production and insulate it with an extra asset, I think you can't go wrong there.
Mike, I guess my main question, I think what our audience wants to know, what do you think differentiates yourself from other Dynasty players?
I think a lot of it is the way that I look at my teams as a portfolio and how I look at them as viewing it in essentially a life cycle of a team. I know like 4 or 5 years ago, when the 1-year punt wasn't super common, I started 1-year punting every single one of my teams. What I like to do is look at it as an investment, right? I work in real estate. You have to pay money to get land. You put a whole lot of money in, and then you eventually cash out big at the end. That's how I like to look at my fantasy teams, because an average 5 or 6 seed only ends up winning the title about 7.5% of the time. An average 1 or 2 seed wins it about 33% of the time. So your goal for every single Dynasty team should be getting to a bye. So I like to say avoid the treadmill of mediocrity, basically an upside down bell curve. I want every single one of my teams to either be first, second, or 12th. And obviously there are a lot of different tactics and smaller minutia in terms of how to achieve that. But I think being as honest with your teams as possible and really trying to strive for excellence and not, I could go sneak into a 6 seed, because that's the home league mindset where, I want to make the playoffs. I'm with my friends. I don't want to be the guy who didn't make the playoffs. But if you really want to win, paying a first round pick for Joe Mixon to go sneak into the 6th seed and losing in the first round is not the way to go.
That's a great point. And I think people do get caught up in like, let's play redraft, or I don't want to be embarrassed in front of my friends. And I think what's great that you've done that I've seen specifically on your Patreon, Dynasty Diagnostics, is just, you're talking about your portfolio. This is a great example of a great way to flesh out individual rosters where you should be headed, where you're headed currently, all sorts of different assets. So I definitely recommend people check out Mike's Patreon. That is a huge, huge asset for anyone that's, just curious, like, where is my team? Should I be contending? Should I be tanking? He does a great job of breaking down all that stuff.
Yeah, thank you. And I have at this point over 1 million teams feeding into my model.
That's awesome.
Because I have every single one of my patrons. I got all their leagues, and my model looks at every team in those leagues and basically just multiplies. So I got everything feeding into my model, so you know exactly where you stand among your league, and also just as a whole how good your team actually is. So I built the tool, 3-4 years ago for myself, and it's been perfecting over time. But yeah, thank you for those kind words. It's definitely a lot of fun, and it's been fun connecting with all the patrons, and obviously meeting you guys through that as well.
With the Dynasty Diagnostics, Mike obviously always does rookie scouting and general rankings as well. So I know there's 2 rookies that you were super high on in the offseason leading into it, and that's Josh Downs and Kincaid. So why don't we break down those couple of rookies first in our next segment here?
So I can start just touching briefly on Josh Downs. I've absolutely loved what I've seen with him so far. He was my second rated rookie in film grade this last season, behind only JSN. And he was actually my 6th rated rookie since 2019. Which is when I first started scouting. So I love the film, and everything he's done has been absolutely incredible. I think there's a lot more ceiling to Downs than we haven't seen. I know he's getting a lot of hype, but he's still only at 19% target per route run, 20% target share. His average depth of target is, solid for a slot weapon. But I think there's a lot more ceiling to come for Downs. And I think the fact that we saw Anthony Richardson be pretty capable as a passer, which I know was the concern for Downs. What is the volume going to be? And obviously he's got the rest of the season with Minshew. I think we can see Downs developing not into, a top 12 wide receiver. I don't think he has that upside, but I think he's a guy who's going to be a wide receiver 2 for a very long time. And, in the Julian Edelman PPR weapon mold, he's got a little Tyler Lockett in him. I know that was a common comp in the prospect season, but he's more of a deep threat. I know Matt Harmon of Reception Perception had him as his highest rated contested catch player of the offseason. So there's a lot to like in Josh Downs, and obviously early production is one of the key metrics when looking at potential production. So all good news for Josh Downs so far.
Mike, you mentioned comps. So I do comps every year for the prospects coming in. One of the comps that I do about 10. It's like a range of outcomes. One of them was Tyler Lockett on there. One that I've really liked using recently is Marquise Brown. I think he kind of fits that mold really well, which I think that kind of fits him getting into the top 24 wide receivers. One guy that I've been kind of pairing together, and we just talked about him, is Rashee Rice. So Rashee Rice and Downs, I feel like, are kind of up on that upward trend slope. Whereas Rashee Rice is someone that I would be looking to sell. Downs would be someone that I'm probably looking to hold right now. It's gonna be difficult to buy. He's probably still going to cost you multiple seconds to get him. But as far as I just think that he can continue to progress the volume that he's been getting these last few weeks and the production, and that's only going to increase his value. And I would not be surprised, Matt, if we see him here in the next few weeks. I know, Matt, you've been really high on Downs, and I was a little bit lower until these last couple of weeks now. And I wouldn't be surprised to see him in the late 20s, maybe by week 10.
No, and Mike's film scouting over the summer, that is the reason that I was kind of higher on Downs early in the season when before he was really popping off. Is Mike's one of the guys that, I've seen him lay out his process in terms of scouting in the Twitter threads, and I trust the judgment overall. So with Downs, he's a guy I was keeping an eye on early to see, okay, what am I looking for here? And you're seeing a lot of the stuff that Mike described on film. Like, he doesn't play like a slot wide receiver to me. Like, I've seen him make catches down the sideline, contested catches, 20 yards down the field, inside the hash marks. So you see the route running, it shows up as crisp as anyone else in the league. So yeah, Downs is definitely a guy that I'd agree with you. I think there's way less questions about him than a guy like Rashee Rice. I don't think you need to scheme him touches against certain coverages. I think he's just going to be a really good player for a long time.
And just speaking, I have less football sense than the three of you, but his movement patterns, similar to like Laporta, like he just moves very fluidly around the field. And I think that leads to, or bridges with his route running, that he's just always open. And like, especially with a young quarterback, if he can trust a guy to be open all the time, like Mike brought up Julian Edelman, and like that's what the role was, that it was just like he's going to be open after 7 yards every time. Boom, boom, boom. I think Josh Downs is, a safer bet than Rashee Rice as well.
Yeah.
And that's just a
what do we feel like,
Mike?
What do we feel like it would cost to go if you're all in on Josh Downs, you're someone that really wants to buy? What do we feel like that would cost? More so in draft capital, maybe you could sell, like you mentioned, somebody that's performing like a Jacoby Myers. What do you think it would cost in terms of draft capital to just go get a Josh Downs? And then maybe the listener can then turn that over into maybe the player value.
Yeah, I mean, he's somewhere in the late 20s, early 30s of most wide receiver ranks, which is generally, less than a first, more than a second. So I think that if you offered 201, you might get it accepted. I think a lot of owners probably wouldn't accept that. I think in general, an early second isn't going to do it. If you combine 2 mid-seconds, maybe that gets Downs. But listen, like the hit rates of a mid-second round pick is basically 40%, 36% or so, if I remember correctly. The hit rate of a guy who's already producing like Josh Downs is way higher. So even though you can double your profit, I wouldn't recommend selling Downs unless I'm sure that I'm increasing either my floor or ceiling. And I don't think you're doing that with 2 seconds. So I would move him for a first, just because I'm moving any wide receiver outside the top like 17 or so for a first, but I would not be moving him for a second right now.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Mike. Yeah, I think he's a hold for the general. Another guy that we talked about that you're super high on, you were the highest I saw anybody before the hype started coming on, is Kincaid. So obviously Knox going down is probably going to free up some potential. I would imagine you're a little bit higher or feeling a little bit better about how you were with him before.
Yeah, I mean, I never like to see injuries, obviously, and
Sure.
it sucks to see Knox go down, but I'm really happy that Kincaid is finally getting work. In this last game, I'm a Patriots fan, so I was watching very closely, of course. They started using Dalton Kincaid a lot, how the Vikings are using TJ Hawkinson, which isn't really how I wanted Kincaid to be used. He is good at finding holes in the zone. He was finding a lot of soft shells. The Patriots were really trying to make the Bills kind of go 14 plays down the field to score. They haven't started using Kincaid how he should be used. His average depth of target is 4.3. At Utah, he was a weapon down the seam. They lined him up out wide a lot. They haven't done that at all in Buffalo. So it's interesting because they haven't used him in the red zone. They were still using Knox there. And I think the fact that Quentin Morris is going to come in, take all of Dawson Knox's blocking responsibilities. Hopefully Kincaid is still going to be used some in the slot and even more out wide and hopefully down the field. But I don't know if the Knox injury necessarily helps Kincaid. I think the breakout was probably coming anyways. He's already played 54% of his slots in the season. 54% of the snaps in the slot and 22% out wide. So he's only lining up as an actual tight end 21% of the time. Maybe that increases a little bit, but I just hope they target him more down the field because he's so clearly the second best pass catcher on that offense. He was number 1 in terms of my hands grade out of any player I scouted this past offseason, including wide receivers. He was just absolutely incredible, and especially in contested catches. So I'm super high on Kincaid. I never moved off him as a top 6 tight end. I moved him from 5 to 6 because Sam Laporta passed him. But I have Laporta and Kincaid still in the same tier. I would not be trading. If I was in a league where you couldn't trade after a startup draft, I would take Kincaid over Laporta. I think he's going to have a better career. I wouldn't do that based on value, of course, right now, but I think Kincaid is the better player.
I love that. So I think we want to pivot just to our next rookie here. Puka Nacua is someone that I think we have to touch on. It feels like we talk about him just about every week, but I mean, this guy is rocking up the boards here. So Matt, we'll start with you. Where are you with Puka? Where is he standing in terms of a buy, sell, top 10 receiver?
So I think he's a buy, but it depends on who you're talking to. Depends on how the person who has him values him. I don't really think there's any reason. I don't think there's any good defense of having him outside your top 10 wide receivers right now. I think he's got to be in that 5 to 10 range. A couple people have made this point. I don't even remember who, Matt Harmon maybe, or someone made this point that if JSN was doing what Puka was doing right now, he would be untradeable. He would be worth more than Justin Jefferson. And at this point, I think that there's enough body of work in the season that you can completely kind of throw out draft capital. I mean, there's film grinders. There's almost everybody that does this for a living, that studies film, that does any of this stuff. They're telling everybody who will listen, Puka is a real guy. All of this is legitimate. Puka is awesome. So given all that, I think if you can get him for anything less than 2 firsts right now, that's a major win. You got to do it. Like, so if I could trade a mid first and a mid second, anything like that, or anything like that, I think he's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about like what would I trade to acquire Garrett Wilson, CeeDee Lamb, right, Jalen Waddle, that's basically where I've got to feel like I'm paying up for Puka. I saw recently, now this was prior to Sunday when he went off, but I saw Garrett Wilson. It was basically equated to Garrett Wilson in a second for Puka in a first. And when you think about saying that out loud, it sounds kind of crazy to be trading Garrett Wilson, but I like that for the person receiving Puka at this point. That might be the type of move. That's the type of move that I would also be trying to do with Ayuk, I think. That's the type of move that I might be trying to do to pivot into a Puka.
I'm not sure that the picks aren't on the wrong side there of that Wilson Puka trade. You said about JSN, like, we got to just ignore the draft capital at this point.
Right.
I like Puka might be my wide receiver 3 in Dynasty. Like,
yeah.
There's really not a good rationale not to. This is the best start of a rookie wide receiver ever. Since Cooper Kupp returned, his target share has gone up. It's 37%. His first read target share is 36%, which is the same as what it was when Cooper Kupp was playing. And yeah, they're funneling an insane amount to these two players. 70% of the targets have gone to Kupp and Nacua. The only real question with Puka is there are more questions about his talent. So when Stafford is gone, because we don't think he's going to be there forever, Stafford is undoubtedly a great fit for Puka. So there are question marks there, but other than guys like Jamar Chase and like maybe, Jalen Waddle, there's question marks for all of these top receivers in terms of their quarterbacks. So why exactly should CeeDee Lamb be ahead of Puka? Why should Garrett Wilson be ahead of Puka? Like, I don't think that they should. So I have him in my second tier after Jefferson and Chase. Where you want to put him in that tier, I honestly have to do a little bit more film work, but he's in that 3 to 8 range for me.
So
yeah, right now you have Amon-Ra kind of at the top of that tier, right at wide receiver 3. So Puka's like right there for you.
I think that's my comp for him as well. I mean, I think he's more of a downfield threat than Amon-Ra is, but if you look at what ARSB has done and why I love him so much, he gets 12 targets every single goddamn game, and so does Puka, and that's like there's a reason that he's right there.
Yeah,
I'll say this: we with our startup, we also did a 23 rookie draft, and I had 107, and he was gone before me. I'll just say that's a little bit of a tease, and that's pretty wild to think about. But based off what you guys are saying, it's totally warranted.
Yeah, I was going to take him at 105, and he was gone
that
as well.
makes me feel a little bit better. Yeah,
so
there you go.
Just another tease. He's clearly highly rated.
Yeah, Mike, there was one other rookie that I wanted to ask you about that you were, I think, a little bit lower on market on that. I have been extremely impressed with, and that's Zay Flowers. I think I was not very high on Zay either from what saw of him as a prospect. I didn't see him as like a high ceiling player. And I've been just incredibly impressed with what I've seen from him watching the Ravens this year. It's not just gadget usage. They are using him downfield. His yak ability is incredible. I just like everything I've seen about him. So what's been your take on him this season?
Yeah, I've definitely been impressed with Zay. His ability to command targets has been very interesting. There is a certain amount of manufactured touches that are still going on. If you look at it, he's had 16 of his targets have been behind the line of scrimmage, and that's out of 53 total targets. So that's about a third of his total targets have been behind the line of scrimmage. But he's been really impressive down the field to me. He's actually been far better before the catch than what I expected. I knew he would be explosive after the catch. He's just been better before the catch. He is a player that I am aggressively selling, though, because if you look at a lot of his underlying metrics, there's still a ceiling to a guy like Zay Flowers. If you look at anyone who's had at least 20 targets, he ranks outside of the top. He's 29th in yards per route run, and I believe he's 35th in PFF grade. So there are still some issues with Zay Flowers as far as, to me, I don't think he can win every route. I think he can win against zone. I don't think he can win against man at this point. He's still far too weak. It's too easy to press him. The way that they're using him, I haven't seen a stat for this, but just based off watching the games, they're using him in motion a lot before the snap, and that is typically when he's getting the ball. And that's smart. Like, that's just good coaching. There's nothing wrong with that. But I still don't think that he has the ceiling of a top 12 dynasty player. So I have him a tier below that in the 15 to 18 range, but I was certainly too low on him as a prospect.
So Mike, really quick, we're going to move into our vets here. So I'm going to give you a quick hitter question trade. Would you rather have Jordan Addison? We saw Jordan Addison last night, Monday Night Football, go off. Jordan Addison or Zay Flowers before we kind of get into our vets?
I would rather have Jordan Addison. I was higher on him as a prospect, and I think the amount the Vikings throw and not having Justin Jefferson, I think that he's going to be a much more productive receiver for the rest of the season, and his market value for the next 9 months will follow that.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
but it's close. It's definitely close.
Yep, agreed.
So on that front, we're talking what will you trade? Mike, what are some win now contending moves that you're looking to make here in this current state?
Yeah, so assuming I have a team that's a 1 or a 2 seed, what I want to be thinking about is, first of all, limiting my downside, because hopefully I already have enough upside in my team. So that means getting a QB3 who's reliable, or getting the backups to my starting quarterbacks. I also want to make sure I have at least 5 startable running backs, 3 startable tight ends. You never know what's going to happen. And if your trade deadline is before the playoffs, you don't want to end up starting, Mike Gesicki in the championship game and losing because of that. In terms of players I'm targeting, I really like targeting players who are young enough to still have good value after this season, but are giving high production. Some cheap options. I like Jacoby Myers. I've said him a few times. Marquise Brown, Isaiah Pacheco's a guy I've looked at. Alvin Kamara. All of these players I expect to have at least the same, if not higher value throughout the whole offseason, and they're giving you excellent production right now. The other 2 guys that I'd shout out would be Kenneth Walker and Travis Etienne. There's such a hole at the top of the running back position in this upcoming draft. Doesn't look like it's going to necessarily change that. So those are 2 24-year-old bell cows. I think Etienne might be 25, but those are young bell cows that I would like to invest in.
To quickly shift with Etienne, is he RB3 in Dynasty?
Who's RB2? Brees Hall?
So is Etienne RB2? I shot too low. Okay.
No. Etienne
is to answer the question.
Etienne, mine is Devin Achane. I just think that we saw Chris Johnson for 3 weeks, and I don't know why we're jumping through all these hoops to think that he's not Chris Johnson. The injuries are concerning, but again, you want to shoot for absolute upside. And while Etienne, I think, is going to get you 15 to 18 points for the next few years, Devon Achane can get you 23. So that's my RB3, but I have a tier of about 6-5 running backs. It's Achane, it's Walker, it's Etienne, it's JT, the Gibbs. They're all right there for me.
So it sounds like if you're not in a strong contender right now, you would move Etienne for Achane.
Yeah, I've actually done that trade 3 times in the last 3 weeks because Etienne was a guy that even on my punts, I loved getting him in the mid to end of the 4th round in startups this offseason. And I just needed to wait until people bought in to sell him. So now I've been able to sell him straight up for Achane several times or with, small pieces going here or there.
We're getting into bye weeks now. There's no bye weeks week 8, but an interesting pivot on a contender that's even maybe a team that you think is going to get a bye could still be moving an Etienne or a Taylor into Achane. Maybe you can get a plus, maybe not, but maybe that team is a contender. I know I have a contender that has Achane, and I'm kind of barely staying afloat right now. So if somebody came in with their Etienne, it might be something that I just kind of have to do. So, looking at pivoting from Taylor, I have a couple teams where I've got Taylor Etienne. That might be something that I look to do, and maybe I can even position a small plus on top.
Yeah, and I think he's going to come back with an absolute vengeance. I'm really not worried about him once he comes back. He had already taken the starting job from Mostert, so I think he's going to come back and just be awesome.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I did sell off my Achane shares before the injury, and it was for high end pieces. But
you got Amon off from me.
Yeah, I gave him and a few other pieces for Amon. The other one I sold him for Laporta. But yeah, no, Achane has been a guy that I've been kind of thinking about that ever since. Where I'm like, man, I shouldn't have sold on those, and I definitely want to get back in the Achane business and increase my shares.
So we're talking tiers, Mike. You mentioned tiers, and we talked a little bit last week on our episode about tiered trading. So I think that's a great topic to talk about with you, the master of this. So Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson. First of all, is it 1A, 1B? And who is 1A and 1B?
It's totally team dependent. I am very convinced that Jefferson's the better player than Chase. I think if we're looking at talent, it's a tier gap between the two. But when you factor in the injury, you factor in the Joe Burrow of it all. The Vikings can basically, because of the void years, whenever they get rid of Kirk Cousins, they're going to have a $28 million cap hit. If they start rebuilding, maybe next year is the year they do that. So because of that, I do have them in the same tier. I completely don't care. It only depends on whether I'm contending or rebuilding. I acquired a ton of Justin Jefferson on all of my tankers as soon as he got hurt.
And what were you getting as a plus? I assume you were getting a plus.
Yeah, I got basically anywhere between a second to a third. I wasn't able to get anything crazy. There were some deals, and this is what I really try to do, is if I have a few other pieces on my squad, like a Gabe Davis or an Isaiah Pacheco. So a youngish player who's contributing, but I don't think their value is totally safe. I couldn't get, let's say, I'm not going to get a first for those guys. Maybe you try to trade Chase, Gabe Davis, and Pacheco for Jefferson and a first, right? You try to combine it. Dynasty Dad always says disguise the shit. So basically put enough pieces in there and then you're like, oh, Pacheco and Gabe equals a first, Jefferson equals Chase. That's fair. But no one's ever trading a first for Gabe and Pacheco. So you kind of got to just expand the trade to do those little tier ups. But I wasn't getting a huge plus on top. Were you seeing big pluses on top of Chase for Jefferson?
No, I wasn't seeing big pluses. I know Brian made at least one, maybe two swaps. So I have a bit of a hot take here. My tier from Chase to Jefferson right now is I'm really wanting more than a second. And that's the reason why I haven't made any Chase to Jefferson trades, because like we just said, nobody's making that deal. The Jefferson gap between him and Chase, I definitely was all aboard that coming early in the season. Jefferson, you're getting the extra points per game. You're getting that CMC-like player. Now with the rest of the season, I think that's starting to become in question. It does seem like he probably will come back. So maybe I've probably changed my tune a little bit. But I'm still very much, once the offseason hits, I would flip them probably to Chase as my wide receiver 1, Jefferson wide receiver 2. They're in the same tier. So I'm not like, if I've got Jefferson on a team, I'm probably holding him just for the sake of diversification. But with the team that has Jefferson, if they're a contender, I have Chase. And even if I'm tanking, I still probably want more than a second. I'm not necessarily, if it comes down to possible points, and okay, then that's a little bit of a different story. But I haven't really run into that situation any. So I do probably want a little bit more. Maybe that's me being greedy. But I do have a little bit of a different take than Brian that's made that trade.
So Todd, we're talking about your trade greed. So why don't you hit us with a couple of trades maybe that you've made in the past week?
Yeah. So 2 that I've made, both these are going to be on the same team. And one was with Ron Stewart. He actually tweeted it out. So I will throw his name out there. The first one being, we've talked about Anthony Richardson being very difficult to trade for, even when he's been hurt. We've seen a couple. I haven't seen a lot in my leagues. A lot of times the Anthony Richardson owner is on a tank team, so I've had a lot of trouble there. But in this situation, Ron was a contender. So the trade that I made, I'm tanking. The trade that I made was Purdy, DK Metcalf, Christian Watson, and Kmet. I'm trying to shed points. And I acquired Anthony Richardson, Jordan Addison, and a 24-2 that'll be late. And this was prior to Addison's breakout. So I'll throw it again, and then Brian or Matt, you guys can kind of run with it. But that's Purdy, DK, Christian Watson, and Kmet for Anthony Richardson, Addison, and a late 24-2. Matt, I know you had some comments on Twitter about this one.
Yeah, I mean, I would take the Richardson side there. So Purdy, DK, Christian Watson, and Cole Kmet. And so, I mean, I think let's say you just take DK and Addison out. They cancel each other out to me anyway. Then you're talking about Brock Purdy, Christian Watson, and Cole Kmet for Anthony Richardson in the late 2. I mean, yeah, that's an awesome price. Yeah, I'm doing that every time, regardless.
I feel like you got a free Jordan Addison. Like,
it's a no-brainer.
I like, if it was just that package for Anthony Richardson, I would definitely consider it. I mean, like Christian Watson and DK Metcalf, I like both of those players, but I'm not giving up a first for either of those guys unless I know it's like the 110 or later. Brock Purdy, I'm not giving up more than a late first as well. Maybe a random first, but probably not. And Anthony Richardson's worth 3. So I think the Richardson side absolutely destroys that. I think this was another good job of, you can convince someone, oh, Purdy, DK are both worth more than a first. Watson's worth a first. And you can see someone doing that math in their head. But this is just $1 for 4 quarters. I don't know how many seasons we need to see DK Metcalf put up 13 points a game before we realize that he's just not the wide receiver 1 that everyone thinks he is. I think this was an absolutely great trade for you, and it probably helps you improve your potential point standing.
Not to belabor the point, but this kind of is a perfect example of why understanding what your build is and context mattering. This guy is in desperate need, it sounds like, of some points. You're in desperate need of shedding some points. You guys are a perfect partner. That opens the door, and maybe it's a little bit, it's lubing the wheels a little bit. So I think it's an absolute home run, Todd.
Yeah. And one note with that trade, it looks a lot better today than it did Saturday night, because since then Christian Watson's gotten hurt. Brock Purdy had a terrible game. DK then got announced out. Addison had a blow up game. Yeah. I mean, everything since 72 hours ago has gone perfect for me. So I think
Anthony Richardson's coming back next week.
Yeah, we do have to kind of keep that in context. So then quickly, I had one other trade in this league. So I have been shedding points, but I was kind of tearing into that 103 range. And now after this trade, I thought, okay, you know what? I think I can get to the 102 and maybe I can get all the way to the 101. So I made a kind of another desperate plea to shed some points. So I moved, and I've talked about purchasing Mike Williams on basically every tank that I've got. And so I moved Kenny Pickett in 2/3 and got Mike Williams and a 25 second. So that was Kenny Pickett in 2/3. Should be laid for Mike Williams in 25 second. We don't have to go into this one. Just sheer run of the mill point shedder, and Kenny Pickett, for me is whatever.
I mean, I just one quick comment. I think Mike Williams and Chubb are the two obvious tank buys where you can get somebody cheap that they were on a win now team. You can give them a piece that they think is helping their team short or long term, and then you benefit in the long term. So.
Yeah, and with this one, and then maybe Mike, you can hit a couple of your trades. This one, I'll toot my horn on the process here. So I was trying to shed Pickett. I went through my teams and I looked and saw that one of the teams needed a quarterback this week. He had a couple injuries and basically just positioned, okay, do you want to take on Pickett? It'd be basically given to you for cheaper than maybe his typical asking price.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Mike, you want to hit us with a couple of your favorites from the last week or so?
Yeah, by the way, that makes so much sense. I was trying to figure out whether Kenny Pickett had the worst touchdown rate in history. I couldn't get it fast enough, but it's 12 touchdowns and 570 attempts. This guy is not good at football. Anyways, yeah, let me talk about one of my trades. It has a few guys that we've talked about a lot. One of the things that I really like to do is on a contending team, sometimes you just got to acquire value. And I think that when Jefferson got injured, first thing I did was I went to all my tanking teams and tried to acquire Jefferson. Second thing I did was I went to every single other team and tried to acquire Jefferson, because you never know when you're going to get a price that's just too good. So this was a team, I was first in the league. Why are you putting assets in Jefferson? Because I'm trying to build a dynasty, not a one-year champion. I traded CeeDee Lamb, Jalen Waddle, and a late second-round pick for Justin Jefferson and Puka Nacua. So again, Lamb, Waddle, and a second for Jefferson and Puka. Curious to hear what y'all think about this.
No, I love that trade. So, I mean, I'm going to kind of touch on this in my sell of the week. But yeah, I would take Puka over Waddle. I would definitely take Jefferson over Lamb and I would do that on my best contending team right now. So I'd be more than happy to take the whatever short-term hit for the long-term gain.
So that's paying a 2 basically to tier up from both of those receivers, right? So that's a great price to pay. And it sounds like if you're a contending team anyways, you can deal with Jefferson, short or long term this season.
Yeah, I was 12-0 with the median at the time, maybe 11-1. 6 good receivers. I figured I could withstand it. I actually got offered Jamar Chase for Justin Jefferson in a second, moments after I made that trade, which must have been what the other guy was offering. I declined it because I think my team is strong enough to compete without it. But it just goes to show that, take advantage of opportunities regardless of your team.
That's a great example.
Yeah, actually, there was one trade in the league that you're in, or you're commissioner of, Mike, the Will Ferrell League, where that league is the best roster out of all my 18 teams.
It's really good. Yeah.
Yeah. And last week, so I was talking to Brian and Todd before we recorded last week's pod, and Brian kind of talked me out of making Tony Pollard my sell of the week, but I really wasn't digging what I've seen from the Cowboys offense and from Pollard in particular. So I was interested in maybe moving off Pollard for someone like DeAndre Swift. And that's all I offered this guy in the Will Ferrell League last week. I offered him Pollard for Swift straight up. And then while we were recording last week's episode, he sent me a counter of giving me Swift and Puka. And he wanted Jared Goff on top of Pollard. So I traded Goff and Pollard for Puka and Swift. And I was pretty happy about that. I had no intentions of going after Puka in that league. I didn't know he was available. I was just trying to get a running back that I, had a little more trust in how he's performing this year, and Swift over Pollard. So
Man,
like
if that's not tapping your lines and just making sure you're staying in touch with people in your league, I don't know what is. Just
yeah, I'm not going to take any credit for that. Like literally, he sent me what I considered a gift. I'm thankful for it. But that team probably doesn't need the charity. But the only slight hesitation is what Mike said earlier too about locking down your contender teams, is because I do have Lamar and Joe Burrow in that league.
Yep.
And my only QB3 was Jared Goff. And I was kind of thinking like, man, Jared Goff is a perfect QB3 for like a loaded contender. And I was like, you know what? I will not miss him. To get Puka for sure. Like, let's move off him.
Yeah. And then I got to give Matt some credit because he's too modest to do it himself. That team put up 200 points with Brian Hoyer as the QB2 last week. Because Joe Burrow was on bye. Absolutely stacked team. I do have Brock Purdy there. If you want to chat.
Yeah. We might talk.
All right.
But yeah, Brian, what kind of trade were you looking at this past week?
I made a bunch of trades this week. I'll kind of just jump into one contending one. We talked about, I think we mentioned Stephon Diggs as a potential buy and a contender. I might have overpaid a little bit here, based on this, but I gave a late 1 and 2 for Diggs. I think it's a pretty strong team. I'm fringe buy, I would say, just based off of some bad luck to start the season. But I think Mike, you're the commissioner of this one as well. But I think it was kind of yeah. I think it was the Degenerates Anonymous. And I already am pretty ultra win now, but it was kind of one of those things that I want to. It's 2 or 3 strong teams at the top that it's kind of an arms race. So I was curious what you guys were thinking about that one.
I'm still in on Diggs, Cup, Adams, Tyreek, these guys. I mean, I think you're going to still get 2-3 more good years. If I can pay a late 1 and a late 2, I'm doing that all day long. So, I mean, easy win for me, especially on a contender team that, as long as, you're not just like a 1 year and it's going to be a blowout. But either way, I think you can then move Diggs in the offseason for a late 1 and a 2.
And so I want to mention one more trade that happened pretty close to when we started pod, like probably earlier today. I traded a late 25-2. This is kind of a random deal, a late 25-2 for Treylon Burks. So as everyone probably knows, I'm a massive Treylon Burks supporter. I've backed off quite a bit. I'm a little scared for my exposure in general, so I've been trying to avoid it. But if I'm giving a late 25-2, a really strong teams too. It's not my 2 for Treylon Burks. I'll take that quick little lottery ticket for sure.
Yeah, I'm not completely writing him off. I think that's a fine acquisition cost personally.
Brian, we've been in lockstep on Burks from the very beginning. I did sell quite a bit, and I think I got decent value kind of early in the year when I started to get concerned about what his opportunities were going to be with this year with the Titans. So I did sell some, and that's exactly what I'm trying to buy back in at, is something like a late 2.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I think that makes sense as well. I'm probably selling for a random 2 at this point, but if it's looking late, I think that's about right.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah, it's a top 2 team. I'm figuring it's a pretty strong team. Not my pick, but
So I'm curious, Brian, I'm just looking at this team where you made the Diggs deal. It looks like you lost Justin Jefferson in that league. Was that the reason that you went to go look for Diggs? Did you consider moving Jefferson in a deal to get a few wide receivers? What was your thought process?
I do like my depth. It was more the sense of, I forget who listed him that traded with me, but he put something out there that to me, I got like the taste in my mouth that it was like, this guy just wants to ditch points.
Yeah.
So it was pretty much, I sent that trade, almost instantaneously. He wasn't shopping other offers really. And it just kind of was this is a win-win. He's trying to shed points, and I lost Justin Jefferson. So
I have to correct you there. It's a win-win-win because I have his first-round pick this year.
Boom.
So thank you for improving the slots there. I was very happy to see that as well.
Of course, Mike has his first.
Going to push that trade through quicker, Mike. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I think we should start kind of winding down. This has been a lot of fun. So what we want to touch on here, Mike, is who is your buy or sell of the week?
Yeah, so we mentioned him earlier, so I won't go into too much depth, but my buy of the week is Tajay Spears. I think you're running out of time to get him for less than a first, and a big reason is the trade deadline is coming up. We already saw the Titans move off of Kevin Byard. Whether or not they move off Derrick Henry, I'm not sure, but I think we can all confidently say that this is Derrick Henry's last year in Tennessee. Tajay Spears has looked awesome. He's already, up to 50% of the snaps. He's getting, solid work. I think he's looked really good, but I think he's just a guy where it's going to become clear Tennessee's moving on from Henry, and Tajay Spears is going to be worth a first in the offseason. At worst, he's going to be in the Miles Sanders, Rachaad White, early second range. But given that he's an exciting, explosive second-year player, he could move up into Javonte Williams going into 2 years ago range where he was a third-round startup pick. Like, I don't think it'll be that high, but there's very little downside. So I would pay, an early and a mid-second for Spears. I think you could maybe get him for less, but I think his value this offseason is at least a 1.
I'd agree with that. The other thing I like about that is the bar is low for him for him to show that value go the rest of the season, because everyone knows that Henry's there. So it's not like he has to be productive, right? He just has to have the flash plays that he's been showing every few weeks to get that excitement there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like buying a quarterback who's being redshirted, who is going to be a starter the next year, where it's almost better that he's not playing a lot because maybe he looks like Rachaad White or Miles Sanders, and then no one would like him. So I'm all in on Spears there.
Yeah, I'll go to my sell of the week, and I had this listed before I even knew what the trade that you had mentioned, Mike, but Jalen Waddle is a guy that I really like as a player, but not as a dynasty asset. I've never really thought his price made a lot of sense. And it's funny because I think Devontae Smith and T. Higgins are kind of suffering value-wise a little bit from being like wide receiver 2 on their team, and the alpha's eating and their production not being there. And Jalen Waddle is just not suffering from that. And I don't really know why. He's doing fine, right? He has like 12 to 14 points a game. I do think he's going to have some boom games coming, so maybe you want to wait until after a 30-point game to sell him. But I don't think his production justifies the cost. I don't think his age is enough of a reason to, put him up there. So I'm looking at selling him for a guy like Puka straight up. So I would definitely talk to the Puka owner, see if he'll take Waddle straight up. I like the idea of selling him for JSN in the second. I would talk to the Ayuk owner and see if he'll give you a plus, which he probably won't, but that would be a trade I would consider making just straight up anyway. Waddle for Ayuk. I think I'd rather have Ayuk. So Waddle would be my sell of the week, just purely based on his value.
So my buy or sell is not so much a player as much as a strategy. I think Mike had mentioned, some Bipocalypse, and we talked a lot about Bipocalypse last week. This week you don't have any buys, but week 9 you have some super prominent fantasy players. So we're talking Lions, 49ers, Jags, and then ... Broncos. But you're talking Jahmyr Gibbs. You're going ARSB. You're having McCaffrey, Ayuk, T-Law, all those things that we're talking about, like short-term status or gratification that people are chasing, it seems, in Dynasty a lot when they maybe shouldn't be. So this is something I think you can target those teams that have those types of players, and knowing that they're going to be in a rough spot next week, and kind of search out and maybe get rid of some of your junk. Or we talked about like dressing up your shit. Rashad, Madison, Derrick Henry, get some, 2s or some, maybe like a Tank Dell, or we talked about some of the younger other rookie wide receivers. I'm searching out those teams to see if I can kind of get, again, a value add, like Mike was talking about with Jefferson. Whether you're on a contend or not, if you can get value, search that value out. Yeah,
that's a great strategy. I have Gardner Minshew almost everywhere, and I'm going to be trying to trade him to if someone happens to have T-Law and Jared Goff, give them Gardner Minshew, get a few thirds or a second even, and take advantage of that.
Yep, definitely.
I'll close this out here. So I teased my my buy of the week earlier during Bull or Bear, but I'm with Mike here. I'm buying in on Brandon Ayuk.
Yep.
He is in that top 10, 12 range for me, and I'm more than willing to move off of a Garrett Wilson or a Waddle or a Lamb and get a nice plus on top, because I think ultimately they really are in the same tier. We talked about PFF receiving grade. He's second in the NFL right now for receivers in PFF receiving grade. Target share, he's ninth in the NFL. The ESPN Analytics wide receiver grade that they posted today, he was second there. So he is, to me, probably a top 5 talent at wide receiver. And I think that, if we're talking talent over situation, I think that the situation will eventually get better.
Todd, I have one question with that topic. So we're talking Purdy's struggles a little bit earlier. Do you think Purdy's recent struggles are going to create a little bit more of a buy window, even more of a value add potentially?
Yeah, and I think that's a key point. I mean, I still think Purdy is good. When things are going well for Purdy, your group chat's like, oh, is Purdy is he a thing? Is Purdy good? And then, when Purdy plays bad, all of a sudden he's a terrible quarterback. I think Purdy's a young quarterback who's going to continue to get better, and Shanahan seems committed to him. So I think, the volume's not going to be great now, but I think as he progresses, I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, I think as Purdy progresses, the volume is going to go up, and in turn, that's going to be great for Ayuk.
Love it.
Yeah, and they have a bye, by the way, in week 9. So maybe Debo comes back after that, and maybe that's the time to buy Ayuk when he's out of people's thought process, having not played in a week.
Yeah, agreed.
So, Mike, thanks for joining us. You want to plug your Twitter, plug your Patreon one more time? I know we talked about earlier.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for having me. Obviously, I've talked to y'all a whole lot offline, so nice. I'm been listening to the pod. Really, really excited y'all got it going, and it's been some good stuff. Find me on Twitter at Dynasty Zoltan FF, Dynasty Zoltan podcast as well. I think we might have Brian and Matt coming on doing a bit of a home and home later this week. And then my Patreon is patreon.com/Dynasty Zoltan. I got a pretty unique name, so just search it on any platform and you'll find me.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome. Thanks, Mike. So we are buying Brandon Ayuk. We're buying Tyjae Spears. We're selling on Jalen Waddle. Maybe we can sell Waddle and buy Ayuk. And then we are keeping an eye on our bye weeks and bye apocalypse and see what we can do to take advantage of some of our owners. But thanks for joining the Dynasty Market Watch episode 1.06. Do us a favor. Hit us with a retweet or a like of the podcast. Keep giving us feedback in the DMs. That's been great. For Mike, for Brian, and Matt, I'm Todd. Thanks for joining.